I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Jeff Haanen. Wait, say that again? Yeah, one more time.
Organizations become institutions after 3 transitions of executive leadership. I think post-exit, there is a lot of wisdom that is lost to the world when people completely disconnect and go into sort of self-focused pleasure rather than say, what are the right avenues for me to be, I think what the Bible would call be an elder, or somebody that really cares for their community and actually leads really well.
Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacies series. I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Jeff Haanen. Jeff is joining me virtually from Colorado, where he lives and works and engages in community. We weren't able to be together in the studio, but we're going to have a great dialogue today. As you know, we're in the middle of this series on mergers and acquisitions, broadly this M&A space. We've already had multiple conversations through the transaction, planning for an exit, roll up, a board member's view. But I think you're going to get a really unique perspective from Jeff and his organization, Better Exit, with respect to what does that mean, right? How do you approach this, not for the sake of the process of the transaction itself? We'll talk a little bit about the role of all the professionals around the table, but an area where Jeff has identified through his own personal experience in going through an event and an opportunity to better serve owners and entrepreneurs and founders as they think about an exit and how to have that be the best exit possible for themselves. And that's the focus, not on the financial capital, but the focus on the human capital, which ultimately the financial capital is a toolbox to turn around and serve the family, the purposes that they have set before them, the calling that they have, and what they're trying to achieve, and using the liquidity that's provided from what a monetization event is in doing that. But the work internally so that the drain of the process, the roller coaster that it can be, the range of emotions, that there's an outlet to be able to turn to someone in a confidential way in order to process these emotions, to wonder if all of this is normal, to have a vision for themselves and their future. And so Jeff brings his experience professionally. He's a father of 4 daughters, a wonderful family, and he's just got a great perspective of integrating his faith and his work and professional and looking very holistically regarding how individuals approach their businesses and this concept of an exit event. So with that, we are going to engage in this conversation and dive in. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to have this important conversation regarding exits and really what I look at as human capital stewardship. I know we're not together here in Chicago. You're out in Colorado. But thank you for taking out the time and in the audience getting to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, thanks, John. Looking forward to the conversation.
So to start out, for our listeners to get to know who Jeff Haanen is, share a little bit about your background, personally, professionally, so that everyone gets a little bit of a glimpse into the perspective that you're bringing to today's conversation.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So I live here, as you said, in Denver, Colorado. Not quite as beautiful, I'm sure, as Chicago is this time of year, but I live in Denver, married to my wife, Kelly. We've been married for 20 years. I've got 4 daughters, actually, me and the girls here in Littleton, Colorado. So that's a big part of who I am as a girl dad and trying to hone my emotional intelligence skills day by day. So that's a big part of who I am. Grew up originally, though, in the Midwest, in Minnesota, did college in Indiana, have been out in Colorado now for 20 years. But who I am, I mean, most people know me as a writer. I've written a handful of books, all connected to faith, work, and culture. But really, I'm an entrepreneur. I love building stuff. So being on this podcast, I'm excited to talk to you, John, hear more of your story as well. But I built a civic organization in Denver called Denver Institute for Faith and Work, which is an organization that is dedicated just to what it sounds like. How do people live out the gospel in their day-to-day work? So I built that over 10 years and went through my own exit process, which was externally great and internally really hard, which I'm sure we'll talk about today.
So in your formative years, even going back further before your 20-year marriage, congratulations! And with the 4 daughters, I've got two older daughters myself, and they'll keep you on their toes. So congratulations on your family. What was your growing up family like? Was it a lot around business and these conversations and faith and work?
None of that, actually. So raised by my mom, who was a public school teacher, and my dad, they were divorced, but my dad sold advertising. So business was not in the conversation at all. I came really to the business conversation as an immigrant over time through some of my work in theology. So I went to undergrad. I did undergrad in economics. So there's a little bit of business in there, though studying international economics and business are not the same thing. And then I did a seminary degree.
Okay.
And when I was in my divinity degree process and learning about what is the Christian faith, I realized that it was much bigger than I had originally thought. I
Hmm.
thought it was about my own soul and my destiny, after I die, and it is about that. But actually, it's a much bigger picture of redemption of not only myself but human systems and people, and eventually the entire world. So I actually came into business much later and got to know a whole bunch of entrepreneurs through my work at Denver Institute for Faith and Work, saying, "What makes you tick? Why do you build businesses? Why are you an entrepreneur?" And so that question of not only what are you building, but why are you building it, became really important in my life and in my work.
What in so mixing the business and business school and seminary together, and on your bio, your very opening line, "I'm an entrepreneur and writer, building companies and serving leaders committed to healing the world through work, healing the world through their work." What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of people work for a lot of different reasons. Maybe actually I'll go back to the beginning of that. A writer and entrepreneur. I love understanding the world. So I've written a book called Working from the Inside Out, which is about gospel and work and culture. I wrote a book on retirement in America called An Uncommon Guide to Retirement. I've written for Christianity Today and others. But I also like building companies and I like building organizations, as I said. It's important to me, though, that what I build actually has a redemptive purpose. And so I think you can think about that in a few different ways. But one, I like that word healing. The world has been fractured and wounded. We've been wounded in our souls. We're hurt. The world is hurt as well. And when you start to take a hard look at companies, there's great things in companies, and as Immanuel Kant said, they're all crooked a little bit.
Mm,
And so I actually think that when we're thinking about our work and we're thinking about business, we have to not only think of what does success look like, and I think in our legacy is important too, but what human need am I actually serving here? And business seen in that respect, I think, is incredibly good, incredibly
mm,
good. The
mm.
businesses provide the wealth that we need. They provide employment. They provide all sorts of goods and services, from technology to healthcare and everything in between. And businesses can be a force for good. But I also think, because the biblical story shares both a picture of goodness and creation as well as brokenness and fallenness, we actually have to look at both of those. And I think when we're honest, I think most of us would say there's something good in my work, but there's something that needs healing as well.
Well, and we'll come back to some of these concepts to go deeper into it, but listeners are probably already starting out going, "What does this have to do with mergers and acquisitions and monetization events?" And so taking some of this background, help the listeners bridge to understand where we're going to go in this conversation to go much more deeper into your newest venture that you're launching. What does that look like, and your passion for work? What is the focus and the strike zone for you, so to speak, going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. What the heck does this have to do with mergers and acquisitions and a liquidity event? We should talk about that. Well, I was really formed by my own exit, my own leadership exit after I left Denver Institute for Faith and Work. And this was a couple of years ago now. And I can share a little bit of that story, but the short of it is I had no idea that my exit would be as spiritually, emotionally, and vocationally formative as it was. I had got to the point where the organization was healthy. It had leaders in different areas of the organization. It was ready for a transition. It was a nonprofit, not a business. And so I began that process, but I realized it was like a twofold process. One was the external succession process, but one was this internal process that entrepreneurs go through when letting go of their thing. And I
Mm,
think a lot of the heat, I think a lot of the pain, I think a lot of the friction in the M&A process, I think a lot of the tension with investment bankers, a lot of it has to do not only with a large liquidity event, but it's actually getting ourselves very wrapped up into the business. And a part of my own transition out of leadership, it was a good transition, but my identity was so wrapped up into my thing, I didn't know if any part of me would survive apart
mm,
from my business, what I was
yeah.
actually leading. And so, to foreshadow a little bit of what we're going to talk about today, I've started a new company called Better Exit that walks alongside of owners, particularly in some of the soft parts of an exit, but the emotional and the spiritual and the relational, and then eventually the vocational aspects of an exit. Because oftentimes we're not talking about some of the human parts, but of course, the human parts of an exit are going to shape everything from how the deal gets structured to who we become 3 or 4 years after we sell a business.
And I would challenge listeners right now. They're saying, okay, but Jeff went through a nonprofit transition. That's different from a business transition. And I challenge those listeners that are thinking that right now to suspend that thought, because the tax status of the entity, for profit or not for profit, is really independent of every other dynamic that comes into play with respect to founding an organization, leading people, hiring, firing, strategy. I mean, the tax status is completely separate from everything else that we're speaking about. So if individuals set that aside, take the business and theological educational background you have in the formal sense of it, and then all the individuals that you work with and that you served through the Institute for Faith and Work, because it really was a bit more, if I understand correctly, research centered. So help listeners then understand what was the work of the Institute in Faith and Work, because you're dealing with a lot of the same individuals, right? You're dealing with people that are founding their businesses, leading companies, working through transitions. So you're interacting with all the individuals that are probably listeners on our call, that represent that same profile. So help listeners understand a little bit better the people and the work that you were doing.
Yeah, so the work we primarily worked with business leaders at Denver Institute for Faith and Work. So we had an annual business event. Several hundred of Denver's business leaders called Business for the Common Good would come together every year and talk about faith and work and business. We had a fellowship program. We did podcasts. We did all sorts of different programming, and principally for professionals and executive leaders, not exclusively. We've done some work in the trades and otherwise, but those were the people that I served. And honestly, it is a good point. I did lead a nonprofit, but I always felt like a fish out of water in a nonprofit. There's something about the nonprofit ethos and the entrepreneurial ethos that are pretty different. And I always felt much more at home when I was hanging out with my buddies that were raising venture capital or doing other wonderful business ventures. And that's where I find myself today, is working in small business and venture in a couple other areas. So I do think there are some differences, but I would actually challenge, to your point, um, that presupposition that there isn't a common entrepreneurial experience. I actually think there's a lot of common entrepreneurial experience, especially thinking about entrepreneurial legacy, of what does it mean to be excited to grow? What does it mean when everything falls apart? What are you actually experiencing? What's that tension point, that entrepreneurs experience between externally, I have to project strength for my shareholders and for my employees. Internally, I feel incredible doubt whether or not we're going to even make payroll, in 3 months.
Right.
Like those types of things, those are the exact things that I went through day by day too. Losing a big customer, losing a big donor are very, very similar. So I think they're actually very similar human experiences. And then also sort of the letting go process of an exit, I think, is very similar. And as I've done research and now talked to quite a few business owners about their own exit process, I found we're all humans after all. Yeah.
Surprise, right? Teaser
Surprise,
alert.
we are human beings. That's right, and all of our brokenness.
Well, and so going through the process then, duration from founding of the institute to your moving on, how long was the organization around? The strategic impetus when it was time for you to move on. What was your own process going through from founding to exit with the organization?
Yeah, I'd be happy to give a little bit of that story. So I exited after 10 years. I tried to exit after 5 years being entrepreneurial, but the organization wasn't ready and I couldn't actually give it to anybody that I wanted to. But after about 9 years ish, it was more like 8.5, I decided, no, this actually is the time. And it was a combination of good things and hard things. And so if you can come back with me to the summer of 2021, at this point I was leading, but I was actually experiencing just a lot of anxiety. Internally, I just felt tired, like I had to hit goals. I wanted to leave, but I kind of doubt whether the organization would survive without me. And I think a lot of owners experience that. Will this thing falter and collapse? Because I care about my team, I care about my employees, but work has become just this tremendous sense of anxiety. And I would actually experience waves of depression on occasion. And so going into the fall of 2021, I hit this just decision point. And I call this like peak anxiety. I was in torment. Should I give up something that I love and the people I care about? Like, what would they say about me? Would they be disappointed? Would they be angry with me? Would people lose their jobs if I wasn't here? I mean, I was at this decision point, like, what would happen? And I remember actually one day I was in tears and my heart was pounding. And I remember yelling out to God in an empty kitchen saying, what am I supposed to do? I just was in a wreck before I made that decision. And actually, I think a lot of owners, they may not always talk about that, but it's an incredibly hard decision to sell, whether that is a third party sale or even internal. It's to let go. It's actually very, very difficult. So I was in that stage too at this decision point. And then I made a decision that I was going to sell. So on the business side, you'd be talking to an investment banker. For me, I talked to my board and said, you're going to now start, I would like to request that you start this transition process to a new CEO. And actually, right then, I felt this real sense of like relief. But it was also a very strange experience I had because I kind of felt duplicity in the context as well. And the duplicity is you have to keep things quiet. And in every exit, not every, but the vast majority of exits, you're not going to go tell all of your customers and your vendors, employees, or whatever that you're thinking about selling in a year. You actually
Right.
have to keep that pretty close to your chest for
Yeah.
the time being, for the well-being of the company. And I was actually no different. And so I had to keep this pretty close to my chest. But I also felt like when I went to work every day and we were hitting goals, for several months, I started to feel this sense of shame of like, I know I'm not going to be here in a certain
Yeah.
amount of time. So this is sort of the beginning of my sense of, okay, we're moving this forward. I did send this relief. Then when we made that public announcement, this was at the beginning of the transition process for a civic organization. The public announcement, usually in the business context, is usually when the sale is right there,
Right.
or right after, right? But you get
Yeah.
this sense of praise, like people are talking about, like, wow, that is great. You sold your business. And there's a weird juxtaposition. I've talked to a lot of owners about that praise time of like, you have this liquidity event, you have dollars in your bank account, but
Right.
I lost my community, I lost my sense of identity, I lost my purpose, and I can't share that with my friends because they're like, who's the rich person now that has
Right.
lost purpose, right? And so it really makes a sense of isolation. So I have some more to my story as well. I'd be happy to share it in a little bit, but there is sort of two sides of this exit. There is the internal process that I wanted to share a little bit about my own,
Yeah.
and there is the external that looks like it's all well and good, but it can be a very tough process.
Yeah. Or even the survivor's guilt, so to speak, that comes with that of, yeah, you're moving on with a loaded bank account. And then everyone else that is, trying to get tied up or employment contracts or uncertainty now that just went through the roof for them. And yes, confidentiality being a huge part of the transaction to make sure that future value is continuing to be built for the people the organization is serving. And yet you feel like, you're lying to people because you can't disclose the information that's there. And so you end up with guilt on multiple sides of it. When you were going through the roller coaster, and we'll probably reference the roller coaster ride multiple times, but before the decision was actually articulated to your board, before the process was kicked off in that way, um, your thought process regarding you're hitting bottom, you're looking to the future. How much was the moving on? How much was the survival for the organization needed to transition from you to someone else? Where does the founder syndrome come into play in terms of that thought process of no one else can do this but me? How did you balance all of those items out that were running through your head simultaneously and in conflict with one another?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think for most business owners, as well as for myself, you really just got to focus on the transaction, or you need to focus on that succession, because not only is the enterprise value wrapped up in this thing, but a lot of my future net worth is wrapped up in this thing. So I think the personal side, the individual, the founder side, oftentimes just gets lost because everybody's trying to think, how does this business transition really well? Whether a private equity or another buyer, whoever is buying it, that really has to happen. And so what I was talking about, that internal experience, oftentimes doesn't come to the surface. If it is, it's frustrating, or it can be very, very emotional. But to your point, founder syndrome, yeah, I was no different from any other founder. I've thought, I've built this, all roads sort of lead to me. This thing couldn't possibly survive without me, right? And so then fast forward, actually after my transition, it is a bizarre feeling the month after to realize that thing is going just fine and I'm not needed one bit at all. Because you
Maybe I
actually
wasn't
have,
as important as I thought I was, right?
well, it's an interesting thing, because on one side you're like, I'm glad, I want them to do well. They're your
Yeah,
people, they're your business. On the other side, you're like, kind of I kind of hope things go wrong and they call me up and they say,
right,
gosh, you were really important. Come back and
right.
save us. So it is almost not just founder syndrome, like it's almost the savior syndrome. But I had those
Yeah,
exact same things as
yeah.
well in that. And it just shows and I do think this is pretty typical in people that are in high stress work, like entrepreneurship is one. I see it with military. You can see it with professional athletes. But when a lot of your identity is put into it, you become very fused to your thing, and it's very hard to find a life apart from it. So this is one of the things I think that's real challenging in the M&A process, is that if we don't talk about the human piece, you're not going to really understand the M&A process, because it's all done by humans. We
Right.
cannot just think like numbers are abstract from humans and in their processes, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that these aspects of it are really important to understand, not only what is the deal terms and how do we maximize values, and those are important, but why are people behaving the way they are? What sort
Right.
of internal need do they have in this process? And even if your listeners are thinking about their own transition, starting to think about questions of who am I apart from my thing, it's important to do early. It's hard.
Right. So this concept of entrepreneurial legacies, talking about the entrepreneur component of that, as you take the word legacies, how do you think about, define, we even look back on the legacy you left in chunks, the totality of your life, but also the different chapters or books along the way of the different organizations that you have been involved with and what you're looking to do in the future. How do you think about legacy?
Yeah, for me, when I think about that, I think about, I want to create, it's a part, I have a three set part of my own calling. And one of them is creating institutions that can heal the world that Christ so loves. That's a part of my own calling statement. I've written a calling statement. And when I think about that, I think about, well, I believe Denver Institute for Faith and Work, an organization that I started, I believe it can contribute to that. My legacy is, I want that community to be healthy and strong and be doing good work for another 10 years, another 20 years, another 30 years. And a part of that, I came to believe through actually an author by the name of Andy Crouch, who wrote a book called, I believe it was Redeeming the Gift of Power. He said, organizations become institutions after three transitions of executive leadership. And they
Wait,
start
say
to
that again. Yeah, one more time.
organizations become institutions after three transitions of executive leadership. They start to
Hmm.
build the internal muscle of how to pass the reins. And this is why a lot of things like taking the reins out of founders' hands, it's very hard and very fraught. It's very, very difficult. Founders build incredible enterprise value, and they can actually crush it in a lot of
Hmm.
different ways too. But as I think about legacy, I think, how do you not only build, of course you need customers, of course you need revenue, of course you need employees and quality vendor relationships, you all need that too. But actually this transition, this exit part, is a part of a legacy. And how you do that well, I think is going to make a huge difference to the future of the business. I have seen it done very poorly in
Hmm.
both nonprofit and business contexts, and particularly nonprofit. But when there isn't that enterprise value piece, yeah, I saw stuff just go bad, arguments happen, things fall apart. Even oftentimes, very big business failures can be interpersonal. human
Yeah.
failures as well.
Yeah.
So legacy is those organizations, are they doing well? And then on a personal side, I would say, maybe we could talk about this a little bit more too, but how is my family doing? Are they actually embodying the gospel? Are they actually healthy and whole people? I think that's an important part of legacy for my own life as well.
Hmm. So your personal calling statement,
Yes.
when did that come up? Was that something again that you learned early on? Is that something that evolved given your work? You were like, I need to figure this out for myself.
Yeah, well, I professionally talked with people about calling for many years, and so I figured I better have one.
Better do it yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I wrote a book on retirement, and actually one of the chapters was on calling. And in that, it was a mentor that said, "What would your 90-year-old self say to your current self about how you ought to live?" And I thought that was kind of interesting. In conjunction with that exercise, um, uh, somebody encouraged me to write down, what do you sense is a calling from God that would transcend a job, that would be
Mm,
not just connected to one job. And that was very important. And I've kind of hung on to that over the years. So for me, it's three parts. One of them is to lead my family to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. The second is, as a writer, it's to leave a written testimony to how much God loves the world.
mm,
And the third is what I was talking about earlier, is to build institutions that I believe can help heal the world. And I think businesses are that. Businesses can actually contribute to healing, whether that be professionally or socially or economically. They can really help heal the world. So those are actually three things: as a builder, as a writer, and as a husband and father. It's it's been pretty simple for me, but I've always come back to that
mm.
calling statement in my own life.
How important do you think that is for everyone to have, especially in the isolation of, being the founder or being the, leading the company, leading the enterprise as you enter into this exit consideration, right? How much clarity do you need on those items in order to inform what an exit would even look like?
I think it's really important, particularly in the front end of those exit conversations, but particularly you need an identity or a calling that can transcend your job or the current thing that's making you money right now. Because when you don't have that, that's when I think a lot of these unhealthy things, even in my own life, can really make the M&A process really sticky, but I also make adjustment to life after the sale, or even if you have an earnout or you're going to stick around but you've lost power in some other ways. Like if you don't have a calling statement that can supersede your particular job right now, it's really hard. You start to hang on. You can actually see this in family too. Those that raise really healthy kids, they're able to be with them and to not. They're able to let them go to college and they're really grateful to have them home. But then some people can really fall apart when kids are at the house because they built their entire life around their kids. But kids, of course, will be a lifetime relationship, but your interaction with them is going to change a lot from when they're 3 to they're 18 to they're 28. So I think those calling statements or understanding really what am I here to do with my whole life and having that
Yeah.
broad can really, really help the M&A process.
Yeah, no, it's and fascinating in the way you juxtapose the business and the family through just pure observation, whether it be our clients and families that go through the liquidity event and not having clarity of the purpose on the back side of that event. My unscientific, I think I shared this with you before. My unscientific research is about 18 months plus or minus. I need to do something besides golf or be on the boat or traveling. I need to get back in the game in various ways because there's that need for purpose versus what everybody imagines or thinks retirement should be. Without full disclosure, right? I haven't read your book on retirement. I've got the other one right here with me, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Um, but I've also seen that in the example. Now, this isn't right a commentary in any way, but a lot of moms that had maybe stepped out of the workforce or were working moms and with the kids, more so than us guys. I don't know what there's probably a whole program on the difference between men and women and family engagement that way. But even with our own family, right? When the kids all left in college and live around the world right now for us, my wife even asking that question of, okay, so what's next? Why? Because she successfully launched all the kids. They're all in very healthy relationships. But there is that question of, okay, so what's next? What is the purpose and how does that come into play? And so that calling piece that transcends family, transcends your business, transcends whatever it might be, that really is your belief system and your guiding principle in the way that you're looking at things, I think applies to everybody, no matter what that transition would be. Am I overstating the case, or is that
No,
the
I
way you think
agree.
about it?
In my book on retirement, one of the things, if I was going to rewrite it, I would have written actually about the distinction between men and women. It tends to be
Mm,
that women are much better at retirement. Men, you actually see a lot of like health problems, lack of purpose. You found so
mhm,
much community and identity in work. Women tends to be, this isn't universally true, they had more of a fluid relationship between work and family because there's usually seasons of caring for kids and working and going back and forth. And men, it tended to be more hardened.
mm,
And so men struggle, they tend to struggle more with retirement. But I did want to make a comment back on your early point. Yes, that 18-month aspect. I actually think most people, after selling or stepping back, they do need a season of rest. And that's my second chapter of that retirement book is very few people have taken significant time off, like a
mm,
sabbatical. When you think about the time word sabbatical, maybe think about a professor or a pastor, but not a lot of business leaders, especially that like driving a building, have taken very significant time off. But I actually do think there is a season to take time off and actually to use it very intentionally rather than sort of drowning in entertainment, but really
mm.
use it intentionally of what do I need to reflect on? Who do I need to be around? What does it look like for me to actually recreate well? Like, what are some of these practices of Sabbath to do that well? Because I think using times of rest and retreat, it can actually lead to this idea of Leviticus 25, where they were commanded to let the land lay fallow 1 year out of every 7. The reason is it would be more fruitful if you actually let that land lay fallow, which of course those in agriculture know, but we actually need seasons where we let the land lay fallow and let like grow in actually wisdom and understanding how this could then influence that next season of leadership, which I actually think post exit, even if somebody is going to retire, I think post exit, there is a lot of wisdom that is lost to the world when people completely disconnect and go into sort of self-focused pleasure rather than say, what are the right avenues for me to be, I think what the Bible would call be an elder or somebody that really cares for their community and actually leads really well. So that is one conversation we can have, but I do think it's important to actually think about that proper relationship between work and rest and an exit.
When you said you would have, if you were to rewrite the retirement book, if you were to go back and go through your own transaction with the Institute for Faith and Work, uh, what would you have done differently? What did you learn about that and about yourself and the process itself that's would have you do a do over, not a do over, but just a do differently?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for asking it, John. I would have had somebody walk alongside me personally. I would have probably even formed something like a personal board or had some sort of a coach that wasn't interested in my organization, but was just interested in me. I felt very alone and solo in trying to figure out what in the heck am I going to do with my life. I mean, the other part of the story that I didn't share in that transition was me trying to figure out what I going to do next. And I really hit a wall. A wall with really feeling sort of lost. I mean, my last thing felt so purposeful, so important. What am I going to do next that's going to feel in a similar way that purposeful, that important? So even when I
Yeah.
got to the point of, okay, I'm ready now, I'm going to start consulting, I'm going to do some work. I looked at a couple acquisitions, a couple of businesses to buy. And what I would do is I would go down a path and then I would sort of pull out of the path. And I would just say to myself, this just doesn't feel the same. It's not quite me. It was kind of like a
Mm,
Venn diagram. There was sort of, as a founder, of a company, my interests and convictions were very, very overlapped previously.
mhm.
And when I took a look at other opportunities, there was some overlap, but it was like, I don't really care about these things, but that could be okay. And I kept on pulling back out of that process. And I think in that process, I really had to go through like a slow period of what felt like a cold, dark tomb. it just
Mhm.
felt difficult of like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I had to sort of open-handedly pray, saying, God, what do you want from me? Like, where am I going to go in this next season? And even in that hard place, I did feel this little sense of being held and accepted, no matter that I didn't have it before. I didn't have the networks. I was losing everything that I felt valuable to me, but I actually
Mm.
still had that which was most important to me. And so then I kind of went through this process of readjustment and acceptance, and it was slow. And actually, several years on, I would stay still in process, but I was a little bit, I experienced a little bit more what I call interior freedom, or that I was okay with leading, or I was okay with following.
Mm.
I
Mm.
felt a deeper sense of contentment to contribute, but not to have to lead or to be noticed, or to
Yeah.
succeed or have those things. I think each of those were part of my own process that, to go back to your original question, what would I have done differently? I wanted somebody to walk alongside saying, hey, when you're feeling really neurotic right now, it's okay. Everybody feels this. Or
Yeah.
let's now have some of the interior conversations, even as you think about what's going to happen next with your life and your work and what you're going to build next.
Well, and again, for listeners to get a little bit broader of a picture, then when you say you wish you had someone to walk alongside you, you already highlighted you've got a wonderful marriage, right, to a wonderful individual and a healthy family. You got a board of the organization. You've got a broad personal network of various professionals and friends, and within your faith community and coming together. You have a lot of people around you. It wasn't like you were out in the desert yourself, yet you
Yes.
felt that way. So what was it about the system structures, people around you already, but still left you lacking and wanting more? What was not being provided to you by the people that were already there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I should first say my wife was incredibly helpful and patient in the process, and her just listening and caring, that sort of listening ear is exactly what I needed. And to your point too, even in sort of my what's next process, I met with 45 different people that I had known over the years, all different executive leaders, and made a long, a matrix and a spreadsheet of what all these people said. The challenge with that, it's like any startup. The challenge with getting feedback is you get all sorts of different feedback.
Yeah, right.
You really got to filter, like, okay, is this person talking about
Go this way, go that way.
what they
Yeah,
want to
right.
do with their life, or what I should do? Like, what is happening here? There's one thing to have people telling you what you ought to do, or, oh, this is great, you should spend your money like this, And then there's another thing to say there's a handful of people that really know you, and
Mm.
and actually could call you out and saying you're doing that because you feel the panic of going to need to be important, and that's why you want that next title. Or you're doing that out of fear, right? Or, hey, that one doesn't look as prestigious, but that sounds like you a lot. And my wife has provided a lot of that. I just think
Mm.
there's a close group of maybe advisors and friends that I think that people need to say, this is your story, right? What maybe potentially the Lord is doing in your story. Um, Not only what is the story of the organization or the business, because the M&A process is about the business, right? I actually think we just need to talk about those side by side. And even I would, in my own view, maybe John, maybe we disagree about this, I would actually invert that. I think the M&A process should be most about owner than business, rather than business than owner.
Mm.
um, that would be my
And why
view.
do you say it? And so let's talk about that a little bit more then. Why why do you say that? Just because of the major intensity on the business itself and the transactional aspect itself?
Oh yeah, I would just say that because even this conversation, this is sort of like a weird soft skills sort of a conversation. My guess would like in the M&A process, right? You investment banker, financial advisor, you have a buyer, your lawyer, accountant, tax advisor. You actually have all of this sort of infrastructure in our culture that's built around uh, buying and selling businesses.
Yeah,
There's a lot there.
yeah.
There's a lot, and there needs to be, because they're oftentimes very hard and very complex. So I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying that is sort of the world you go into. And as soon as somebody thinks I should sell my business, when they first hear exit and strategy, they'll think about, drivers of value, and is this transferable, and they'll have to talk about those. And so there's going to be a lot of conversation by nature around
Right.
the business, because if you haven't dealt with some of these things, if your financials are in complete disarray, there's not going to be much of an exit at all. So you do actually have to deal with that. So I actually think that personal side. The second reason, though, I'd say is if the first reason is the infrastructure is already there on the business side, the second reason I would say is that ultimately people influence all of this process. And having an owner really understand who they are, what they want, what this process should looks like, and have a set of values that will help make decisions. It can be really helpful in high stress contexts when you're, in a negotiation and somebody offered you 20% less and it sounded like they were insulting your firstborn because you've put so much time and effort into this business and it gets really hot and emotional.
Right.
Actually think, well, okay, now we have to talk about emotions that we're feeling and why you felt that. Then we can actually go back into the M&A process and think, let's actually get this work done rather than get angry or frustrated or fearful or all these other things that can happen. So I just think there's the humans are in all of this process, and the owner is the most important part of selling a business. So
yeah. And so we don't disagree. That's why we're having this conversation.
Oh, shoot, I was hoping we would disagree, John.
As we go through it, it's right. Joke with people. This podcasting thing that's going on right now that people are listening to, right, is because of these kind of conversations that don't happen often. And so because of the chair that I sit in as the managing partner of our family office services, back with families and walking alongside them going through this transaction, there is a lot that has to come into play on the technical competencies to get a deal done. In order to prepare the business, walk through it, bringing in the investment bankers, the deal attorneys. But because of the chair that we sit in with respect to holistic wealth management, we see the front end of it alongside the families. And then after the deal is done and everybody else, picks up their ball and goes home, we're still working with the family into the future now, after the event, in terms of how there's a continuum that's there. So whether it's the illiquid concentrated position in the company, how that's evolved over time, all the trust and tax structures that are in place. And then when it converts from illiquid to liquid and also being deployed in various ways, we see the ongoing. And then also my unscientific research of what does that mean back for the individuals? Because they're still going to be there after the business is sold. And whether they have a minority stake in it or whatnot. So we're in absolute agreement. I don't think there's enough time paid attention to the human capital aspect of the transaction as there is the financial capital. Why? Because of the incentives within the organization regarding how the attorneys are getting paid, the accountants are getting paid, the investment bankers are getting paid, everybody, right, that has potential conflicts versus the individual and the human that's still going to be there when they wake up in the morning after the business sells and look in the mirror. They're still looking at themselves at that point in time.
Yeah.
So we're in absolute agreement.
Well, good, I guess, but we should be getting a disagreement before this podcast is done. But I would actually just say I totally agree. That wealth advisor aspect is just central part of just a person's life. I think primarily because, of course, when you talk about money, it brings about where your heart is, there your dollars are. It just brings out all of these heart issues when money comes up. And so you guys have an incredible opportunity to be both pastoral, informative, and shaping a family and generations and hearts to come when you talk about money. I sit on a board of a national group of Christian financial advisors, and I actually think it's a credible opportunity to shape people positively in your seat.
Yeah. And so the encouragement for those individuals, well, or I should say when a family says, well, John will be in touch after we sell, it's like, well, no, why? What there's all the planning, all the legal work, the philanthropic work, the tax minimization, income and estate tax that could be done if you actually plan way in advance of even making the decision to have a liquidity event. Whatever succession might look like for you, you have to plan for that. Don't wait for the event to happen. So as you think now about better exit, right? And a lot about better exit is focused on this human capital. How does the planning up front come into play now with the work that you're doing and the people you're engaging that want to have a better exit, but they want to have the best exit? Because most of them will do this once in their life, maybe twice. So they want to have the best exit possible. How do you frame that? What is the planning side of the cycle, and how does that move into the future?
Yeah, I think the planning part is really important. And so I would first start when I work with clients is the why. Not only why do you want to sell, but why are you even in business? Like, what is your own why? And this gets to our earlier conversation of a sense of calling. And I think some of that will start to surface some of the values that are in the process that you want there to be both before, during, and then after the sale, right? So there is the why question. There's an introduction to obviously the M&A process and buying and selling, which most investment bankers will give, but there's also the emotional process that we help the clients with as well. Discussing how much is enough from the sale, and then also even just practically what are the different options out there, and how does your own why in your life link up with the different options for what you might do for a liquidity event. And there is lots of different options for that, right? It's not just one person selling 100% equity to another. Like, there's just a lot of options there. So I think those things are really important on the front end. And I think done well, that can bring down some of the heat in the conversation during a sale process. It can allow some of the proper rest and celebration after you've sold, that structured Sabbath we talked about, and some of that interior work of even healing and reflection. And then actually on the back end of doing some of the exterior work too, of then actually implementing that plan of everything from investment, income planning, but also what does this mean for my family? What kind of work, regardless of money, what kind of work do I want to be doing, and who am I? All of that planning on the front end can make the whole process of selling a lot easier. And if you don't really know yourself, and if there is a lot of difficulty or tensions between a business partner or even a spouse, like if there's a lot of these things there, the transaction process will bring it to the surface, because oftentimes stressful contexts bring out hard
Bring out the word.
things. They bring out
Yeah.
they bring out hard things. And so if you haven't done some of that work at a time, even in the I might sell in 5 years, well, great, let's talk about those things right now. So you're not shocked that you're 2 weeks away from close and selling your business, and your partner says, "You always have done that to me. I'm never talking to you." I've talked to several investment bankers. I've had those types of interactions with sellers,
Yeah.
and thinking, how did this? We should have talked about this a long time ago.
Yeah.
What are
Right.
you? How are
Yeah.
we here
Right.
now? Right? We're making little tiny changes to the purchase agreement, and you're talking about that. What is going on there? And those are human capital conversations. To your point, John, we just got to talk about it ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, so in your book, Working from the Inside Out, that people can order online, just like I did in terms of going on and finding it, Working from the Inside Out, the word you use in the front end of this book and in different segments is integration.
Hmm.
And it's always a word that I like, where the world talks a lot about like work-life balance very broadly. And to me, balancing is always about trying to spin the plates and something's going to fall and break. And then you get into integration. Well, how do you bring all of these items together? But when you start out in the book, you talk about disintegration, right?
Hmm.
And the fact that things are fractured and broken. And then how do you reintegrate? Um, Help listeners understand, what do you mean by disintegration and reintegration, and what is integration to you, as people try to figure out that balancing act, which again, I think integration is a better approach.
Yeah, so maybe give a couple word pictures. If a bridge is said to have integrity, it's gonna hold up if you're walking across it from one side to the next, right? Or if you think of like a wine glass, for instance, it has integrity when it's sitting on your table and it's beautiful, and you could say it's disintegrated when it falls over and actually is in pieces. And I actually think a lot of our lives, and even in our culture, disintegration is the norm. In one context, potentially there's a religious life, and then there's a family life over here, and then there's a work life. Or I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I sometimes, if I'm around somebody in the South, I'll speak with a drawl, even though I'm not from the South, I'm from Minnesota. But like there's a little bit of chameleon, I think, that can get in us, for a lot of founders too.
Hmm.
Um, that's good sales. You just connect with the person,
Hmm.
and we're good, we're good friends right
Right.
away. But then it actually becomes, gosh, who am I? Did I just do anything to get the deal done? I've had a lot of
Hmm.
these questions of myself. So to answer your question of integration, my life's work is about integrating faith, which is not just personal and private, though it is interior, but it also influences our relationship. It influences our work, our business, our communities, and I would even say how we structure our societies at large. Christianity is a big concept.
Yeah.
In my organization, we call it a big gospel. And so doing some of that work of just thinking about, okay, even questions like, what does it seem to be the purpose of my industry is?
Mm,
So what should the purpose of my industry be? If this was made right, what would that look like? Very few in the real challenge of entrepreneurship. Do we really talk about those kind of big questions? Not often,
right.
but we
Right.
ought to if we want to be integrating that. If you believe, as I believe, the story is something like love God, love neighbor.
Yeah.
Okay, what does it look like in all of these areas of my life? And so that's the integration piece.
So where does that need to be in the process? Does that need to be all figured out and defined before somebody enters into an exit process? Again, with this concept of a better exit versus just getting through the documents and the process itself. How much of that work has to be done up front?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say none of us has all of that figured out because I'm still asking the questions myself.
Mm,
But I do think we should be asking some of those questions at the beginning, in the middle, and then even if you don't have them all figured out on the back end after the sale, I still think there's time there before you go in and launch into another thing to ask questions about my why, my purpose, all of these bigger questions. So ideally, it would happen at the beginning when we're thinking about some of the big questions of what am I doing here and why am I doing this, and then what are my
mm,
values for an exit. Having said that, there's not always life is not always ideal, right? Sometimes you find yourself dealt things that you didn't want to be dealt with, and maybe that too can be a gift of grace. So I would say wherever your listeners are at, let's just start where we're at today.
And no matter where you start from, back to this term roller coaster that you and
Mm,
I have used at times. And in a presentation you've given previously, you talk about an unsatisfying exit
mm,
and the roller coaster nature of all kinds of emotions that come through that.
mm.
Can you describe what that roller coaster looks like and the different stops along the way on the roller coaster?
Yeah, I could describe a handful of them. I mean, on the front end, actually, I had a buddy. His name is Adam. He's an investment banker. And he kind of described it like a graph. Maybe this will appeal to some of your listeners. But at the very beginning, there is like, okay, I'm experiencing some sort of either anxiety or stress or some sort of reason for selling a business. It could be the 5 Ds, it could be death or divorce or debt, or it could be one of these, right? But then, actually, very soon after, there is a real thought of, wow, this could be better if I didn't have this stress and I instead had a liquidity event. So then you're at the top. this I
Right.
feel I feel great. And then so then you go talk to an investment banker and you think, and then they tell you it's worth a lot more than you think. And the market may not actually think that is the
Right. Yeah.
case. We'll see what the market says, right? On what it's actually worth. But then actually, as I was talking with my buddy Adam, it usually sort of goes down from there. It's not always the case, but there's usually a little bump in the LOI process of like, wow, I've got a buyer. Somebody really wants my baby. This is great, right? But there's a lot of details from there to purchase agreement that can just be difficult, and it can be emotional, and everything from grief of loss to anger of like, why would you do that to me in this process? Don't you know how hard I've worked to this, to uncertainty for ourselves and the future in the business. There is actually a lot of those challenges. And so I think the weird emotional juxtaposition of an exit is, on one side you have this liquidity event and the dollars are pumped into the bank account, and a lot of owners soon afterwards they have an experience of both initial euphoria and relief of like, whoa, that's amazing,
Right.
or to our pre-call of, you're in a strange land now. I was never a rich person. Like, what is this like? So it's very
Right.
disorienting,
Yeah.
and you can also be somewhat isolating of thinking, I've lost my baby, I've lost, I don't know. So it's a very strange sort of reorientation process that happens at the exit. And then when I walk with people, it's sort of then a rebuilding of, okay, who are you? What does this mean for yourself and your family and your money? Like, how do we rebuild that in a real healthy way for the future?
Right. One of the the thoughts around deal fatigue,
Hmm.
because the process just takes a long
It
time.
takes a long time.
It's the nature of it, right? And you
Yes.
wanna make sure that you're dotting the i's and crossing the t's, but there is, from the deal fatigue, a level of skepticism and cynicism and fear that comes into play, where all of a sudden it's like everyone's out to get me, right? Even the service providers around, the investment bankers, the deal turn, everyone whose incentive package is aligned to get the best transaction done. All of a sudden it's like, are they just running up the legal bills? Are they running up the accounting bills? Are they running? And all of a sudden you start doubting everyone that's around you.
Yes.
As you go through it. Why? Because it takes a long time. It's not just the proverbial tear off the Band-Aid and, a whopping large amount of money falls into the account
Yes.
at that point in time. And so all of these voices start getting onto people's shoulders and speaking into them, right? Some of them good, some of them not good from all the different chairs, but just, and I'll call it the sinful nature that comes out of people that start looking around them at the people that are on the same side of the table as them. And there's the opportunity for doubt to creep in.
Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from? What's the outlet for that? What's the healthy way to engage the deal team for individuals so that the process goes as well as possible, because it will be the ups and downs.
Yeah, there will be an emotional roller coaster, and I've seen that too. That skepticism of thinking, is somebody the feeling of being nickel and dimed on everything. It's usually like the working capital conversation. That's sort of
right.
It's sort of the
always the working
straw,
capital.
the straw on the back of like, wait, what is this? And are you kidding me? Like, it's usually,
Right.
and then the buyer is a little. I mean, it depends what the buyer is.
Don't worry, we'll chew that up afterwards anyway.
Yeah,
Just getting.
it's usually the working capital where you just feel this emotional weight of just like, what is going on here? Or the tax conversation of what sort of post exit income will look like. That can happen too. So I think, yes, absolutely. It's tough. So first thing I would say, just have somebody to name your emotions to. This happened and I'm feeling this. If people just did that and had somebody to name their emotions to and their feelings, like that would be really helpful. This happens and I'm feeling fear. This happened, because oftentimes we do behaviors and it's like, where did that come from? And if you could just say, I'm feeling this, even if you don't know where it is, it's actually dethrones a lot of these emotions that can get really chaotic and difficult.
Yeah.
Even like anxiety. There's anxiety in the process of, it could be millions of dollars ups and downs. That's going to create, anxiety. I have a friend who I'll plug here on this podcast. His name is Steve Cuss. He's an expert on working with leaders in anxiety. He's written a book called Managing Leadership Anxiety. And he has some of this of just naming your emotions actually is just a really, really good first step. So I would say that would be really, really important just at the beginning. Because if you can actually say, I'm feeling this, then all of a sudden you can start to re-engage the left side of the brain of thinking, what's a wise choice here?
Right.
What should I do? What's irrational on either the lawyer side or the buyer side, and what's like, okay, that makes sense. I'm willing to concede there, and I can do that in a reasonable way. So I think that's probably where I would start, is just naming your emotions. And I've done this in my own life. There's those little emotion wheels that you can sort of print off online and just being like, are you on the blue or the red or the yellow or the green today? It can really help. And this is a guy that's a very left brain entrepreneur that sort of wants to go and build and lead things all the time. For me to just pause, say, what am I feeling right now? It can be really helpful.
In an episode of this podcast that recently had completed, and by the time this airs, right, it's also been posted, is with a fellow board member. So from my GE Capital and my corporate days and my transactions, or working with families as they're processing and managing and governing existing companies or their own transactions, this individual, Kip Pendleton, and I just had a conversation regarding our shared time serving a family together on the board, and Kip's gone through 49 transactions. He's looking for 50th, so maybe he's got it by the time this gets out. But doing it from CEO role, from board role, from owner role, and just both buy and sell. So we're serving on the board for this particular family together. So we've seen transactions before, working with families, going through transactions, how the process works. You need that about the whole team. And yet you even shared, you just couldn't go to your board and share and have the board members be an ear for you. You still felt alone in some ways, which on one hand, as a board member, I step back and say, wow, is there a gap that we should have filled for the families we serve? As a wealth advisor, is there a gap that we should be coming alongside them? but having a neutral outside party to really be that that confidant, that expressing the emotions again, because they're going through it for the first time, maybe in their lives ever, and doing that. They don't know if these emotions are real or not, and who are they turning to. This is all part of what you're looking to continue to do with Better Exit, right? To be that voice. Can you share a little bit more about your vision now for this new enterprise? You're launched, working with individuals. What is the vision for what that would be, and for individuals that are contemplating out saying, well, why would I need to pick up the phone and call Jeff, right? Why is that there? Again, they just don't know, so they're asking the question as they're processing through this.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. So Better Exit, new business I'm launching, and it's really essentially focused on owners, as we've talked about. And it's really owners selling their business to provide some of this support, the emotional, relational, vocational guidance in one of these incredibly formative events of the lives, this transaction. And so we offer a handful of things, right? It is a structured process and walking through. It is actually how you're going to feel at different parts of the deal. And then also, what is a better exit? What is a better exit for you personally? What about for your family? What could it look like for your employees and the business in the future? And really starting to align values across the entire process. And I would just say that we work on a flat fee and not on a commission basis. It's not connected to the liquidity event in any way. And so I do believe that it provides a little bit of that objectivity, that even if the exit ends up looking like, selling to your CFO, and it looks very different than selling to private equity, that actually can make sense for a lot of folks in different ways. So that's what we're doing. It's actually walking alongside the exit guides, as we're called, walking alongside of owners in some of this human piece that then does influence others, but not an investment banker, not a wealth advisor. It's a little bit of a new category, I'll admit. So as we're talking with folks that think, what are you? Well, it's a little bit of like pastor. It's a little bit of counselor. It's a little bit of a fellow entrepreneur I'm talking to, saying, what's this going to look like for you both at the beginning as well as at the end of your exit?
And if people say, yeah, I've got individuals around me that, are my pastor, right? Or my Bible study group, or my board, or my peer group that are out there, or my own, formal board. Where is the opportunity then for Better Exit to come in and fill that, even though you had all those people around you too, and you still felt alone? Why is that? And why would people say, yeah, you know what, we need to have a conversation?
Yeah, I would say a structured guidance can be helpful, starting from
Yeah.
the beginning of the sale to, it could be 18 months after or 1 year after, but it's an incredibly formative and shaping time of one's life. And I would also even say pastor or nonprofit leader or otherwise, if you're a senior pastor and you've been preaching for 20 years and all of a sudden, you let go of that and you're not the senior pastor anymore, you're not preaching anymore. For some people, it feels like not just letting go of a job, it feels like letting go of their faith. So I'll just say that structured process and guidance, because it's actually, Better Exit is definitely not the only person. We'll be pulling in family and friends to make sure that there is a support structure around. But what we ought to do is the feelings of loss, depression, grief, all of the really difficult things that can happen on the back end of an exit, we can communally do better. And I actually think
Yeah.
a lot of owners, they've been tough their whole life. To get
Yeah.
through and to build a business, you had to be tough, right? A lot of owners are oftentimes unwilling to just say, yeah, that would be helpful to actually have that person walking alongside for a particular season. But that's what we do. That's what we do.
Well, and so let's talk about after closing, right?
Sure.
Other than the closing dinner and the celebration and the clinking of glasses that takes place, to be like, okay, that was, that's great. The sigh of relief when the cash posts to the account and the wires all come in. All of a sudden now there's mixed emotions, right? No one's
Yeah.
getting all their cash at closing,
Right.
right? So everybody's got to get rid of that. There's, whether it be the working capital adjustment, earnouts, escrows, et cetera, that get built in, whether it be a strategic sale or to a financial buyer. There's also this tail that's on there, and also there's the potential looking back. What did I do? We've talked about survivor's guilt coming
Right.
out of that. So kind of painting a little bit of a picture for the range of emotions, that continuation of that roller coaster after closing for that next 6, 12, 18 months that people probably underestimate and don't anticipate feeling emotions at that point.
Yeah, yeah. There is that initial euphoria and relief. You just built something and you had the big day, and there is the clinking glasses. And actually, there should be proper celebration for a work well done. I should say that, right? There needs to be that, not only because of the money, but because building a business is intrinsically worthwhile. It's a good thing to be done with the life. So I would say that. Having said that, there is a lot of that. There is some of the loss. There can be loss of my community and the business. There can be loss of a sense of purpose. There can be that disorientation that we talked about. Like, I really am not quite sure what to do. And even that identity redefinition, if you just move from a founder owner to, say, a VP of sales, for instance, if there needs to be some dollars that are coming afterwards, for every owner and founder that I've talked to that goes through that process, that's a weird one.
Yeah,
That's
right.
like, I'm the VP of sales. Like, what is going on here, right? So there's some identity redefinition. I think work needs to be done, which means we need to do some work in rerouting it, because am I just the owner of this person in my community, or I'm sorry, the owner of this business in my community, or is there something in me that's strong, and that can be either the CEO, the owner, the VP of sales, or be unemployed? There actually still needs to be some identity work there as well. And then actually your relationships change. It's a little, I would also say, when people stop looking at you for getting like what needs to be done and what they don't, that's a very strange process as well. Of wow, that person just took that as an opinion and as a mandate for the first time in 10 years. That's a bizarre one, right?
Right. But in all the meetings are on your calendar now that all get canceled all of a sudden suddenly.
Yeah.
And because the nature of the confidentiality going into the transaction, right?
Yes.
Then the closing piece of it. And now share a little bit more, because you talk about it even in terms of did you portray people because they thought one thing, because you have to maintain confidence and hush hush around the transaction? What did that all feel like?
Yeah, well, for me, it was very weird. I went through the lame duck the phase of I was in power but had no power. And when you move to the VP of sales or whatever it might be, if you're not getting all the cash and cents, like like everybody feels that, it just feels very, very strange. So that's a little bit of a weird one. But then it can go to an internal place as well of I'm not important like I used to be. I think that's just very, very difficult. So I think as a summary, if you can take time to rest and do some of this, we're talking about interior stuff, take some, and it may not be 3 months off again, it depends on the structure. But if you can take some time to rest and step back, even before kind of re-engaging, I think that context for interior work is important. And then I think there's another phase of exterior work of who am I? What am I going to do? What does this mean for my family? Kind of what is this next season of life? And then I think that final season, at least a better exit, is landing in something where I feel a sense of calling. I feel a sense of purpose. I feel a sense of calm. And I've taken the lessons that I learned from growing and building a business, and I'm now going to apply them to my next season of service, whether you're in a hold co kind of a life, or whether you're investing, or whether you're investing in angel. I mean, it could be a lot of different things you do, but actually taking those experiences for wisdom for the future, that I think is actually the missing piece. You just go from build to build to build to build because we're entrepreneurs, right? But you actually have to pause to think, what did I learn and how do I go in this process to actually become people of depth and wisdom? And I think we can facilitate at least some of those reflections for owners.
So new venture that you're launching. So fast forward 10, 15, 20 years from now. And again, you're looking back, not quite 90 at that point in time. You're still a young man. But so am I. That's why I say that, right? I still convince myself of it. But 10, 15, so this concept of legacy, to come back to that.
Yes.
What do you hope for in the end for what Better Exit will do coming alongside individuals stepping into these transactions?
Yeah, it's a great question for a podcast called Entrepreneurial Legacies. Yeah. As I think about my own, it is actually kind of similar to my last one. I do want an organization to keep doing this work for a long time and to set hearts free. There's a lot of change that can happen in our life, everything from our identity getting wrapped around the wrong things to just setting our focus on power, money, or otherwise, where we know there's not meaning there, right? It cannot be the end of it. I think for my own sort of entrepreneurial legacy, I want these healthy institutions that in little ways come alongside people and help them find abundant life. Like that's what I want for Better Exit. And if I do other ventures in the future, which is pretty likely because I'm an entrepreneur, it's actually a very, very similar desire, is that business can be intrinsically good that are serving real needs in the world. Whether you're, delivering chemicals to a water or wastewater treatment plant, whether you're walking alongside our owners. Like I think there's a lot of good to be done in business, and I want to see people do things for the right reason, because who we are on the inside does influence the world on the outside.
Yeah. And just curious, it's something we didn't talk about coming into this, but I'm just kind of curious to your take, because I think there's individuals broadly that share a Christian worldview, and there's a concept regarding the prosperity gospel, right? That, if you find favor, you're going to find favor with wealth. The flip side of that, some people view it and say, no, you really should be just, get rid of all of it. You really should live in a way that is at a poverty level, right? For lack of a better terminology. And I think the poverty gospel is just as damaging as a prosperity concept. When you think about this subject of wealth, it does come back to stewardship, independent of the amount, right? Whether it be $1 million, 10 million, 100 million, $1 billion. How do you think about that, the levels of wealth, when someone's going through an event? Because what's fascinating to me, and you alluded to this earlier, is when it goes from being a concentrated position,
right?
The value in the IRS's eyes is still going to be the exact same, versus after the monetization event. But it's almost one of these items, and this is why I don't think people do the right planning before the liquidity event, because they think about, oh, well, then once I have the cash, now I have something to work with and deal with. However, from a planning viewpoint and strategy from a wealth management view, it doesn't matter if it's cash, right, or in public stocks or in your private company. The value is significant no matter what it is.
Right.
So what level is when people step back? Because I also have observed when it goes from the monopoly money, the concentrated position, to being cash in the bank, there's also a level of like, wow, what am I now doing with all of this money and wealth? You had it before closing, you just now converted it, but it registers with people differently.
Yes.
And when it registers with them in that way, even there, sometimes there's this level of, am I worthy of that? Is it okay to have that? How do you process that level of wealth, and what's a healthy way of viewing it?
Well, I'm going to send people to you for wealth planning services in the future. It's what I'm going to do there. But it is a great point of
and we'd appreciate that too. That's
yeah, but it is a great point. I think sometimes people believe once you sell, you'll kind of live in this retirement dream and everything will go perfect. But sometimes you're just swapping these problems for that problems, or these kind of equities for these equities. Like they're actually, they're different. They feel different, but you should actually be wise on either side, whether you decide to hold on to a business for a long time, or sell and have a more diversified portfolio, which is what I think a lot of people are looking for. So I do think I like that idea that stewardship is the right framework. It's not the poverty gospel. You're not more righteous because you're more poor, and you're not more righteous because you're wealthier. You're righteous because Christ gave his righteousness to you. It's just a free gift. That's why you're righteous. And in that sense, you say, what is their master's priorities here? And I think doing some of that work and diving into 2,000 years of what the Christian faith has said about wealth, money, the economy. There's a lot of good resources out there, and they're very helpful. They're very freeing. And I do think when people get to that point of money doesn't have a hold on us, but I think generosity is actually the opening point for money not holding your heart. So if you can give away lots, it really opens up you thinking about even an investment that could be market 20%, or it could be, hey, this is 6%, but it's sub-Saharan Africa, and we actually think that this is going to be a really good social impact business, or you actually give it away. It sort of opens up the range of options to people when money doesn't have that hold on the heart anymore.
Right? Because it only goes one of three places, right?
Yeah.
It's used in some way for you and your family during your lifetime and upon your passing. It's used for charity during your lifetime and upon your passing, or taxes, income and estate taxes, right? So if you want to reduce and take out taxes and do what it is intended to do for your family, those around you, for your community, for the neighborhood, for the world, for charitable purposes, it in some ways it's actually overly simplistic, but it's only one of three places that it's flowing to, and you have choices in that, and
Yes.
that's the part where people's planning comes in on the financial capital. But even in the chair that I sit in, the financial capital is a tool to be used to go make a difference in the world, to leave a legacy, not a legacy in this in the amount or the estate document, so to speak, but leaving a legacy with respect to the impact on the world that you can have through your family and through those charitable endeavors that you may have. And so taking that on, that's the important stuff. And this is where I do believe. So we haven't found anything to disagree about yet, because I do believe the
Next
important work
podcast.
is that, yeah, exactly. We'll find a list of items to disagree about. But the human capital is the most important part regarding a legacy that you're writing and how you're serving in the world. And the financial capital is just the toolkit to be used. Take out the hammer, take out the saw, take out the screwdrivers, whatever tools are needed in order to go build the life that you want, leave the legacy behind that leaves the world in a better place than the way you found it.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. You can't take any of it with you where you're going.
No.
So you may
Right.
as well think about what are you going to do with it while you're alive? Yeah.
Right.
And those are the
Right.
conversations with, National Christian Foundation or Faith-Driven Investor, Faith-Driven Entrepreneur, those folks that are thinking of the various different ways that capital can be used for good. That's
Right.
it. That's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So closing words of wisdom for listeners. And then the second part is if somebody wants to reach out and contact you, how do they do that?
Yeah, sure. You can go to betterexit.co, betterexit.co, and it's just a brand new website, but you could reach out to me there. And then the closing words are, I just hope people, when they think about a liquidity event or they think about an exit, I hope they'll do two things. I hope they think I have a wide variety of options, and I hope they'll ask the question, who am I going to become in this process? That would be it. Like, who am I going to become? Because who you become will influence your wife and your kids and all that you hold most dear. So paying attention to our character is not just a selfish endeavor. It is one of the most generous things you can do, is pay attention to who you become into the future. And selling a business is going to influence that one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we talk often on this podcast because we do it in our firm all the time, character and competency. And we talk about those two. How do you live that out in the character and who you are, and then the competency and giving our best to the people we're turning around and serving. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. Again, betterexit.co for Colorado, so people can make that connection in their mind and remember that when they're searching for you. And looking forward to speaking again, but appreciate it. Listeners, thank you for taking the time to share in this conversation and gain perspective and wisdom and insight from Jeff. And with that, I hope you all have a blessed day. Take care.